Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending upon your time zone when you're listening to this. My name is Seth Earley,
And I'm Chris Featherstone.
and welcome to the Earley AI Podcast. And we're really excited to introduce our guest today. We're going to discuss a number of things that are very important to our space. Certainly why a lot of vendors fail to grasp the core fundamentals of AI and the significance of things like data labeling, taxonomies, ontologies, and metadata. We'll talk a little bit about the limitations of generative AI and why it should be considered a supplemental tool rather than a fundamental enabler, and really how business leaders can better navigate AI technologies to make sure they're getting meaningful and impactful applications. Our guest today is an analytics and AI expert from Hanover, Germany. He has a background in both SaaS platforms and consulting. He brings tremendous insights to the strategic implementation of AI. He emphasizes the need for some of the non-technical aspects of AI implementation and really advocates for setting realistic expectations within the industry. Tobias Zwingmann, welcome to the show.
Hi, Tess. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So the first thing we like to begin with is, common misconceptions. Like, what are you seeing in the industry that, people are not understanding? And I know that's changing. It's a moving target, right? People are starting to understand, okay, well, Gen AI, can do certain things, but then we need to leverage corporate data. But even when they get that piece and go, yeah, okay, RAG, we want retrieval augmented generation. We want to use our knowledge as ground truth. What are they still missing? Like, what are the things that people are not getting, both on the vendor side and on the customer side?
Oh my God, there are so many. Where should we start?
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. Let's start on the customer side.
Yeah. So, to be honest, the biggest misconception that I see from my consulting work is that AI is very often still treated as a pure software and IT topic. And I think this is both on the customer side, but also on the vendor side. There lots of companies are trying to sell AI as a software, as a tool. That's what comes most natural, both to big consulting, but also to SaaS companies. But I think especially with generative AI, there's a certain limit to how you can scale and or not scale, but adopt AI by just looking at from a software perspective, because software is very often just very transactional. You give something in and you expect a certain output, and ideally you can do that at scale, and then that's your business. But with generative AI, we have a much more creative approach to working with generative AI, and also in terms of handling the outputs provided by generative AI, which are inherently more non-deterministic or more probabilistic, however you want to call that, but definitely different to what you expect from a normal software as a service product. And I think having both vendors and customers that go through that mind shift is a big challenge right now, because the whole market has been educated towards software. You just pay $39 a month and you get this thing out of there. But with generative AI, it turns out it's very hard to define what you get as an outcome. And if you want to be really crystal clear and define that outcome, that often turns out to taking the LLM or whatever Gen AI service you have, wrapping a lot of stuff around that in order to tame it, and then selling the output, and then suddenly it becomes extremely expensive. So I think this is one of the misconceptions that I currently see, and also a lot of missed potential by on the customer side.
Yeah. And so when I like the way you put it, you got to put a lot of things around it to tame it, right? To put guardrails around it to tame it. And so what are some of the hidden costs? Because, what we have found, and again, I know I've presented this scenarios, when you tell the large language model to only answer from this data source, and if you don't have the answer from this data source, to say, I don't know, that will reduce hallucinations or mitigate them. I haven't found a situation where I've had significant hallucinations in that situation when I've turned the temperature down to zero, and I've done that, but still, it's still possible, and you do need to do a lot of testing. But tell me about some of the hidden costs. So you're trying to tame it, you're trying to put guardrails around it, and then when people when we did the prep call, you talked a little bit about in a couple of days they do some they'll use some out of the box tools, just some open source tools. And then, oh, wow, this is great. We just need to put another couple of days into this and we'll be set. Tell me about that thought process and that scenario, and then what does and doesn't work.
Yeah, like I call it the 80% fallacy. So people are really eager, and it's very easy to like ship an 80% kind of like ready prototype in even a couple of hours. And people then start to extrapolate that and say, oh, if we did that in one day, like, what can we do in 1 month? And it turns out that in 1 month, like you can't do that much actually, because like every percentage point that you try to get like more and more accuracy becomes like almost exponentially harder. So going from 80% to 90%, maybe you can go do that in like, 3 months or so. But like going from 95 to like 100% or even like 98% becomes incredibly hard because, and I think this is what a lot of people underestimate is like especially in like these open-ended conversations that you have, or where people interact with large language models, like you have an infinite number of possibilities of what people can like throw in there. And we would expect that, for example, if you just have a slight variation in the type way you question that, or a slight variation in the punctuation or whatever you did, that the LLM will be able to figure it out and still give the right output. But it turns out, and like recent research paper also show that there are very strange ways that LLMs behave sometimes, and it's literally impossible to catch all these different exceptions. And that's not saying that you can't use these tools in production. It's just saying that like there will always be a like minimal risk of that something might go wrong. And the really hard part is to quantify that risk. Like, are we talking at like 1% failure here, or 2%, or 1.5%? And I think this is where we have to approach that a little differently. And this is where the hidden costs come in, because you need to have that both expertise, but also these systems in place to monitor and assess the risk that you're actually operating at, both in terms of accuracy, but also in terms of security and like securing your actual applications and software that especially if you have customer-facing LLM applications.
So Tobias, when you start thinking about those pieces, right? Because we look at this from, and by the way, I don't ever see that organizations take cost up front, right? It's usually, which is not the bad, a wrong thing, because part of it to me is, let's understand the use case first and what we're trying to solve. Or as I see them do this, well, we just want to do something that's really cool and innovative. That's the wrong way to approach it as well. So when we see these conversations going, where else do you see them missing? Because you brought up IT a bit, but I want to kind of tease that a little bit. But where else do you see the organizations missing? So it's one thing to miss on the overall use case. It's cost is usually a miss up front, but then it comes back in, because now what does this thing, what does it look like in production? But where else do you see organizations missing, like across IT? What does that look like, and what have you seen?
Yeah, I think like what's often missing is the overall, like, I mean, strategy is such a broad word, but just the big idea of what you want to do. To give you an example, like we have companies like Tesla, for example, right? AI for them is like super mission critical because they want to have autonomous driving. If they fail at autonomous driving, like the whole company will go bankrupt. Maybe not, but it's super important, right? But then we also have companies like, for example, Moderna, which is like the big like shining star use case for OpenAI, and they have like 80% of their employees are using ChatGPT. So it's a very like horizontal approach, but like with lots of like individual like use cases that people do on a small scale, but that have a collective large impact. And then we have companies, for example, like big retail giants, like Walmart, or like lots of big retailers here also in Germany, that have a very pragmatic approach to AI. They say, okay, if it saves us like 2% in our supply chain, like of course we're going to do this. Like it's a no-brainer. And just figuring out where you are in your overall like organizational ambition towards approaching AI, I think this sets the stage for all the things that come like after that. Because if you want to have this whole transformation, then you need to have also someone in your organization that is driving that transformation, because ultimately it's also a cultural and people problem and aspect. If you want to have these pragmatic approaches to AI, then you need to empower the different business units to just like go out and do whatever works for them. If you have this transformative use case, then you have to be sure, and you also have to manage your stakeholders, that there's a certain risk attached to that it will eventually fail and not work out. And what I see is that companies are not really sure what kind of these games they are playing, and kind of like sprinkling in different things from all of these, and sometimes trying to copying what currently is in hype in Silicon Valley, sometimes just buying a tool, doing stuff here and there, and throwing things against the wall, hoping that something sticks. And I mean, to a certain degree, you need to experiment and also need to have like lots of these like low shell like touch points with AI and try things out. But I think you should be aware from a leadership perspective, where's your organization going here? Because it makes a big difference whether you are an like insurance company, a company that I currently work with, like insurance is like heavily affected by AI. The whole business model is kind of like at risk. But then there are other business models like, more brick and mortar types businesses, carpenters, handymans, and so on. I don't know, who are probably not that much affected. We can still use it here and there, but they will still like be there even after AI probably. So I think this is important to navigate that, and you don't have to overthink that, right? But you have to figure it out and somewhere have that alignment across leadership, what to do.
Do you feel like they should be going into, because the use cases and stuff they're looking at, I always feel like there should be, which I try to help them understand, risk versus value in terms of the use case they're thinking about. But then that leads into, well, what is the risk assessment according to what this looks like? And that could vary per organization. What is like, I love that you brought up organizational alignment because it's so important. The cost assessment, what's the feasibility, the technology feasibility, right? They're also thinking about this from the perspective of, well, these are technologies we've never even looked at before. So how do we retool our organization to actually understand these technologies? And some of them jump in because they know the Microsoft stack. So, okay, that makes sense. Or we see a lot of these types of things. So there's a lot that goes into, I think, thinking about this also from the perspective, like you brought up, what about pattern recognition technologies? What about propensity models? What about classification models before you even get into generative models?
Yeah.
And what can that look like? And I think it feels like there's just a lot of re-education that needs to happen and/or uneducation and then re-education that I find that is absolutely critical. So it's interesting, but at the same time, it's disheartening. At the same time, it's so exciting, right?
Yeah.
All at the same time. So, but anyway, but I'd love to get your take too, in terms of when we start looking at some of these challenges and stuff, what does it look like, and where have you seen where we've disappointed these inflated expectations? I know you talked about that before, right? In the pre-call, but what does that look like, and how do you help these leaders get over that hump?
So I think one of the big missed expectations that we could not live up to, I mean, more than we, but generally the AI industry, is that there will be more and more progress happening on the LLM front at the same pace that we have seen before. So like we have not like I think we are not in the like exponential phase where like we will have super intelligence next year. Maybe we'll have, let's see. I don't believe in that. I think we will like we are already hitting a limit with the LLMs, and this is not to say that like they are not useful, but now we kind of like concentrate on the use cases that actually work with the technology that we have right now, because there are tons of use cases we can do with that. And I think we need to educate customers to just focus on what's there, not to wait on like what's next in 2 months, because like from my experience there are like business leaders sitting there like and just waiting waiting what would happen, and say, okay, like let's wait until Christmas, like we will have a much better model there, maybe we don't even need to rack until then. So and I don't think this will happen. Maybe it will happen in the long term that we don't need these like toolings around large language models, but I think thinking strategically about your use cases, you should position yourself in a way that you benefit from like AI progress, but not in a way that you kind of like depend on it like at all expenses. So to give you a concrete example, right? If you have a chatbot use case for customer support and you're currently using a RAG architecture to deliver that, that's great. Like go ahead and do that. However, like keep your eyes and ears open, and like just consider the fact that there might be a point in the future where a single call to LLM costs maybe not 2 cents or 0.2 cents, but maybe 20 cents, but like it has all like the RAG tooling included, because like you have very high context limits or other AI service or whatnot. Would you be able to make the switch? Like, would you be able to adopt that technology, or are you so locked in and committed to your current infrastructure that you can't actually move anymore? And in the end, that comes down to like make or buy decision. Like, are you going to like invest in all that technology and build it up yourself, or are you just like using what's there and like consuming these RAG services as a service as they are offered right now? And I think right now it's good to stay flexible, but it's not like advisable to just like wait and see what's happening. So there's this fine border of like taking action, but at the same time not locking yourself too much away into like long-term obligations, which is a fine line to walk. But I think like managing that, this is really critical right now.
So one of the things that we talked a little bit about in the prep call was aspirational functionality, right? Things that vendors say they can do, but maybe they can't quite do it today. And I think that's a real danger when you're talking about making plans around use cases and hearing what vendors say they can do versus what they can actually do. Do you want to talk a little bit about that in terms of what you've seen, and then how do you kind of mitigate that risk that they're ahead of their skis on some of this?
Yeah, so I don't want to call a specific vendor out, but I think we all have one vendor at least in mind who's kind of like under-delivering on their promises, especially with co-pilot like interactions on their computers. And I think the really important point here for business leaders is to figure out, and that's why I always say, like in my roadmap, everything starts with AI understanding. Like don't fall for, being sold snake oil and, having other people like just selling you like, something out of the blue just because you don't understand it. And like there's so many tool vendors out there that will just tell you something or sell you something because you have no idea what they are talking about.
Yeah, and they won't make it clear. They won't
make it clear, like on purpose, on purpose.
Yeah.
And that's why I think if you cover some basics around AI and LLMs, and again, this is not about like, taking a PhD program. So it's about like committing a few hours, maybe taking a course or, just diving deep or trying some things out. You will be in a position where you can ask the right questions, where you can ask these vendors like, hey, how do you deal with this and that? Like, how do you manage the non-deterministic behavior of LLMs? How do you make sure that like we actually use the data sources? Or which kind of format does my data need, or what are the requirements for my data in order for your solution to work?
Right.
Because lots of vendors are not transparent about that. And like you don't even have to answer these questions for yourself, but just by being able to ask these questions, I think this will make it so much easier for you to like, cut through the vendors that are just selling something out of thin air, and those who actually have a mission and know what they are talking about and helping you implement that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think one of the other interesting points that you had made is you said, the generative AI is kind of the cherry on top of things, right? Because you need to have so many other elements that are aligned, such as the data. And, one of the things that we're doing for a large medical equipment manufacturer is we're going in and we're using some of the, templated agent-based approaches using LLMs to fix the data, right? To fix their product data, to enrich it. And that's kind of a foundation for everything else that we want to do. And no matter what, you're still going to need good data. Like one of the biggest challenges around customer service operations and using Gen AI is, again, you don't want to use the Gen AI to answer the questions. You want to use the Gen AI to interpret the questions and make the results more conversational, but you need to have your knowledge base, and that needs to be, correctly structured and tagged and organized. What are you seeing in terms of, when vendors are not getting it right, or when they're not understanding that piece? And you kind of alluded to this already, where you said, they want to sell software and get licenses, and they don't want to necessarily spend a lot of time with customers trying to go upstream and fix a lot of stuff. But that is fundamentally what needs to happen. So, do you want to talk a little bit about what you're seeing? What are they not quite understanding or getting or wanting to deal with? Maybe they understand it, but it's like, I want to sell my software, I don't want to fix your data problems.
Yeah, I think like, I don't know if they don't want to understand, but I think the big takeaway is that these software vendors are selling solutions to problems that they can't fully, they just can't solve. Like if the clients don't have data in the right shape, in the right format, or if knowledge is contradictory, you can have the best software and in the end it won't work. And
Right.
the software company, it just can't solve that for you. It's just like is selling you the car keys, but the car is not there. It's like very hard to come up. But then like you have the expectations from investors, external stakeholders, internal stakeholders to to just drive that software adoption. And I think this is so important, or this is the critical thing that they don't quite get.
You run
or where they are just like maybe thinking by themselves, really honestly thinking that AI will like at some point fix it in the future, like just hoping that OpenAI will release GPT-5 in the next 3 months, and then we don't have all these issues anymore because we have superhuman intelligence. Maybe that's the bet they are having, but honestly, I don't know. Right?
Well, I mean, also get into the thing I love about Germany is Germany pushes the envelope for GDPR and for a lot of the security standards for data out there. However, with a CEO that's in a global, you've got, data that is all over the place. And you're also trying to think about that from the perspective of what can be shared, what's sensitive, what can't be shared. So how do you get a whole roll-up view using, these types of tools? How do you instruct customers with those types of perspectives and issues?
Yeah, for me, I try to get back to the original alignment. Like, what are we actually doing here? Like, if we look more for a kind of like divide and conquer approach for AI, I think then you have to also empower the different business units also globally to like ship their own solutions and just like build their own stuff. If you see, like, for example, customer support or whatever that is as your one single killer use case, then I think the first step, and that's what I tell them, is to think about this organizationally. Like, what does it mean? Who is the owner of this? And if you don't have that aligned ownership from the beginning, there's no way you can approach you can get any technology to solve that for you. Because in the end, it's about like enforcing rules, ownership, budgeting these things, and then like shipping it, and like also taking the risk that it might not work. Like, and who's willing to take that risk? Right. And that's where a lot of companies, at least the customers that I work with, are rather going for these, what I call like atomic use cases, where they give like responsibility away to different business units. You have a kind of central alignment where what is the high level strategy, like what's the general direction you want to go to, but then at the same time you empower different business units to just run their own experiments and like adopt AI as they need. Of course, like the trade-off of that is that you are really not doing this like whole transformation of your organization. You will still run the same business model as before, just like more efficiently and maybe like, in a more qualitative and, a more powerful way. But at the same time, it's a pretty safe bet to do that because you don't have that huge upfront investment. Then also there's like the chances for success are just much higher. But yeah, like that's why I say like it comes back to the original alignment and having that like high level leadership commitment of saying, okay, like what role does AI play for us actually? And then living that up.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I think that in large enterprises that have a lot of fragmented processes and fragmented systems and fragmented data, yes, you can have some point solutions. I mean, we went into this project, not even considering it an AI project, right? Considering it a knowledge and information architecture and product data project, right? We are going to be using AI approaches in solving those problems, but that is not, they knew they weren't ready for AI in the way most people interpret it. But we're going to have we're going to have multiple interventions to fix certain aspects. But the fact that this whole ecosystem is so fragmented is what's problematic, right? That is, growing by acquisitions and, who owns the knowledge for this area, who owns the knowledge for this area, where do we go upstream for, level 3 support, right? And there's 20 plus applications that people have to go to, that their field service engineers and their remote service engineers and their technical consultants. There's dozens of applications that need to go. So I think on the one hand, that's where you're kind of saying, well, how can we have a transformation? We can have limited interventions in these areas, but we do still need to think of this in an overarching manner. And I think that's where you have to start thinking about what are those incremental value points, right? That we can show, and then show in a longer term roadmap how all these things can come together. So, what are you seeing there when you work with your customers? Are you putting together, like 12-month or 18-month roadmaps? I mean, if you go beyond that, it's hard to say. But how are you kind of helping them, bring those pieces together? Because again, it is lower risk to have them as atomic projects, but that as you observe, it's not going to have that overarching transformation. So how do you kind of resolve those two things?
So like the one that you brought up with road mapping is exactly it. I recently have a customer that is is running a call center operation. So they are offering call center services here in Germany, and they obviously had that use case to use AI voice bot to like handle the conversations, right? Okay, so that's where I came in, and this is like a perfect example because this is like if you have the matrix of integration and automation, this is a highly integrated and highly automated use case with AI, which is like the most difficult thing you can do. And after like the first like trials, they figured out, okay, maybe this is not going to work the way we want to, and like this is where like I came in, and then we started working on that. And the way we scoped that was to say, okay, like this is the high level goal, like that's where you want to be. And obviously, technology right now is not there. It might be there in a few months or maybe years, but like, what's the roadmap like to get to that point? And so we trimmed down the use case and split it up into different, like, atomic elements or individual assets. For example, the first thing that we shipped was a customer support chatbot, which is not integrated or not automated, but which customer support agents, like human agents, could just use while they are on the phone to quickly retrieve information and give that to customers. So we just like took a whole part of that journey out and realized that first. And then we have the text to voice feature as kind of the next step on the roadmap to see if we can use, for example, new multimodal AI models where you don't have the voice to text and then text to voice transcription, which is really like a poor user experience, but maybe in a few months where we have like true voice input to generative AI models and also voice outputs from them, which will just have a much faster interaction, also much better experience. And if we're at that point, if technology is coming at that point, then we already have the data sets or the database ready and the knowledge ready that we know AI is able to respond to customer questions. And then we can actually validate the next feature, which is shipping that as a voice feature. And then the next option would be to have that in live conversations with customers. And that's what I mean with road mapping and trying to, have that high level goal, but kind of like chunking it down, seeing what's possible today, and then validating step by step. And I think this is like the big difference between like you're just trying lots of use cases in your organization and seeing what works. But then also like in contrast to that, like having that ambitious and like, forward looking goal, but being able to bring it down to, okay, what can we do right now in order to take the first step? And also if that first step works, what is step number 2? And typically I look for 6-month roadmaps on these projects and just reassess after that where we're standing and what the next steps should be.
Tremendous sense because they build upon one another. They're building blocks, right? In order to get agent assist to work correctly for the agents, when they can just refer to something, you're basically improving search, you're improving retrieval, but you're also using some of the AI tools to make that more conversational and understandable. You still need to think about the structure of that information. You need to make sure it's correctly curated, right? You need to give the RAG engine something to pull from, and then present that to the customer. And then you can validate that, right? Then you can say, oh yeah, that's working really well. Oh, look, our agent productivity has improved. We're spending less time, on callbacks or where we have higher first call resolution, we have shorter time per incident, right? We have higher CSAT, we have higher agent satisfaction, right? Then that whole component is that building block for that next piece that gets built. So I totally agree with that. I think it makes a lot of sense. And again, for organizations to be successful with these things, they do need to think first about the use case, and then what data is needed to satisfy that use case, what functionality. So when you go into organizations to help them with these processes, where do you begin that? Yeah, of course, you start with some education, then you start with, well, what's important to the organization? How do you then start breaking it down, say at the board level? Because that's one way to start, is start at the most senior level in the organization.
Yeah, I mean, I would love if it's always that linear way where we start with educating on AI knowledge and so on. But like what typically happens is that where I come in is when organizations kind of like try something and it's not working. So, and that's where we have to kind of reassess the whole situation. And in many cases, circle back. And as I just explained, like maybe reassess the use case and Then there are two ways, like for larger organizations that typically, becomes a certain business unit or department we're looking at. But if the organization is smaller, something like, 100 employees or something like that, or up to 1,000 at max, then you can have a real boardroom conversation of, what's the overall goal or the overall challenge that we are facing here. And then I typically run workshops in order to have commitment and alignment on that top level and make sure everyone has the right understandings. Because I remember one conversation where we had one group of executives believing in AI being the next thing and becoming better and better, and the other group saying this will never work. So and just having this commitment to what do we all believe actually, what does it mean for our business? It's super critical, because this makes all the difference whether you will say, okay, this is just another tool or another technology, let IT deal with that, or whether you say, okay, we need to treat that seriously. And I think this is really where every organization needs to kind of find their own way in terms of what's their business model, what have they tried before, and also, as we said, and as Chris already mentioned, not only looking at generative AI, but AI in general, which is also kind of classical machine learning and so on. And this is where I do AI design sprints and so on in order to figure out what's the best use case mix here for that organization.
Obviously, there's a disconnect between above the budget line and below the budget line in most cases, right? One of the teams is super advanced. The executive team isn't, right? Or the opposite, right? Somebody wants to go. So I would love to get your take too on, we find these use cases, and generally the use case is broken in terms of maybe it's too far advanced, because part of this, to your point, in that customer experience use cases, we want to completely remove all voice or all agents, and we want to do all digital voice, right? Which is a cost savings metrics, which seems like to make a ton of sense in terms of all of these scenarios. And when we get to a perspective though centered around, okay, instead of thinking about this from, I just want to remove all costs out of the equation and make this, I don't want to have agent stuff. I think Seth brought up a good point where now we get up, in terms of the scenarios centered around, it's not necessarily we want to shock the system and remove all agents out of the environment because of first call resolution or because of just the overall scenarios. It's a matter of, well, why don't we think about this from the perspective of, let's provide augmentation scenarios for them to make them more effective, so we don't churn as many agents out of the perspective, right? So the cost savings can still be there, but let's look at it from a crawl, walk, run, as opposed to shocking the system. So what I find generally, and I don't know if you do as well, Tobias, is that generally the use case is big, hairy, and audacious, which is super fun and really neat and interesting. However, it's missing the crawl, walk, run. They want to go straight from 0 to 1,000 in like this, right?
Yeah. Which is, and I think the reason for that is that, customers have been educated over a long time by SaaS businesses that that's the case. You give me $99 a month and you get the full solution. We all do everything for you. And every SaaS, for SaaS businesses, there is no crawl, walk, run. It's just here you pay, and that's it's on off, that's it. But especially if you build these AI capabilities in your organizations, and that's exactly the way I approach it, to figure out how can we make our first baby steps into this project. And in 99% of all cases, that's augmentation. We want to have augmented use cases because it's easy to control. It doesn't cost us anything really to try it out. And if it doesn't work, we can just abandon it. There's no, nothing happens. And scaling up from there is much easier because there are so many learnings that you can use in order to take the next steps. But at the same time, I think this is the most critical, or the critical thing then, is that it's not so kind of easy to sell to executives or external stakeholders who have these super high expectations of AI, and then you come and say, hey, maybe we get a 10% increase in productivity here, and they're like, wait, that's it? And I think this is where I think the hype that we currently have is not kind of benefiting these practical use cases, but at least in my impression, we're getting there slowly, that people realize that even a 10% productivity improvement is a super huge deal if there's a good ROI on that, depending on what kind of the investment you have for this. But I think this is we have to circle in that people are coming from an expectation where, you know, we have social media posts that say like we will all be out of jobs in 5 years and AI is doing everything for us and no one needs to be a programmer anymore and all these things. So like getting that back into reality and saying,
Yeah.
okay, like here's the best I can do is 10% productivity improve. This is the,
Yeah.
you know, communication or the conversation we're having.
Well, you know, I have a really interesting story about that and setting expectations. And that is where when there are multiple vendors in an organization, in a project, like when a customer brings in a customer, you know, a vendor that specializes in this and a vendor that specializes in that, et cetera. And we had somebody who was doing their user experience, right? And we do user experience, but for whatever reason, they decided this company was going to design the user experience. Now, it's a lot easier to design a user experience than it is to build the application, right?
Yeah.
It's like designing in PowerPoint, designing in Figma, right? And mocking things up. Where does the data come from? We don't know. You know, what's the shape of that data? I don't know, right? What happens behind this button? I don't know. You know, it's like you tell me, we have to trace it back. And what I was saying to people, this user experience company was saying, it's not a user experience company I'm working with today. So this was the customer's user experience company, right? We have a great vendor partner that we work with, but they were saying things like, oh, it's going to be so great and everybody's going to find exactly what they need in the context and what they need it, when they need it, the old, you know, the right information at the right time for the right person, the promise of knowledge management for everybody. Researchers are going to be able to do this and commercial people will do this and executive, and they're like setting these expectations sky high, right? Like, everything's going to be wonderful. And according to their beautiful pictures, yeah, it was going to be wonderful. And I had to be the one to say, hey guys, I think we have to manage and temper expectations, right? This is not going to be, you know, information nirvana because there's so much other work needs to be done. Maybe in 2 or 3 years, right? But not in 2 or 3 months because you cannot fix all this stuff. And I was hammered for that. I was beaten up. I was taken out back by a couple of executives and beaten with, you know, with rubber hoses, right? Because figuratively, because I said the wrong thing, you know, and I brought everybody down. I'm like, dude, you can't, you know, it's better to set expectations realistically today than have people be disappointed tomorrow. And I think the challenge was many of those executives were going to be on to their next project, right? So I think it really is important to set those expectations and manage those expectations and be realistic. But, you know, a lot of times that does not get the excitement. So I think sometimes when you're too realistic with organizations, they don't really like it. You know?
Same here. Yeah, I have exactly the same experience. Like I was in a project doing an architecture review for a RAG application and like giving recommendations of what it costs to implement that. And like in the end, like there was no business case anymore for that, for the internal product. Yeah, it turns out they just got someone else in who had a different opinion and that's it, right? Like, because the problem is that the owner of that product already sold the solution internally to the top level management. So they were actually not really interested in having a real assessment of that application. It's about getting external confirmation that this is actually working. But that's not how I work. And the problem is that there are a lot of people out there actually who just sign these things off and say, oh yeah, you know, if we have these and these assumptions, you know, we'll be fine. Just, you know, maybe it takes 6 months more to work out. And this is exactly where lots of organizations are right now. Deeply invested into very, very complex AI use cases that get more expensive by the day and not delivering the results that they were originally promised. And I think this is just not useful for AI adoption in general. And yeah, but it is what it is. And I think we have seen that in otother technology life cycles before. So, you know, digital transformation, we had big data. I don't know where we would start with that. So there's so much. And I think this is happening all over again.
And you know, what's really funny is I was on the ground with, I'll name the company because I used all public information when I wrote about this and I used my own experience. It was Verizon, right? And when I was talking to people at Verizon, you know, I'm hearing stuff on the ground, but I, as a customer, had a terrible, miserable, like impossible experience, right? And I wrote an article about it in Customer Think, and it started off me being so angry at how I was dealing with Verizon and how difficult they were and how I got sent in endless loops and then told go here and go there. And then I found out, even a year after the fact, they still weren't honoring the deal. It's a long, long story. But my point was, I put it in the context of 6 fails and 6 fixes around their digital transformation. And one of the things that they were saying publicly was, oh, our digital transformation is this huge success. And all the executives say it's a huge success. And all their marketing says it's a huge success. And I, as a customer, and plus I knew people internally, but I, as a customer, was experiencing it as a miserable failure. Yet everything was saying it was an enormous success. And I think the executives are fooling themselves. I think they're lying to themselves. I think they get other executives that don't want to speak the truth, that don't want to say the emperor has no clothes. And I think that's what's happening with AI these days, is that people are so dug into these projects. And for those organizations that kind of feel like, there's something not right here, it's not too late to reassess and to come back to some real value, right? And that's where, people like you and people like me, and I'm sure Chris, in your dealings, you try to speak the truth, and you try to give people the real answers. And even if they don't want to hear it, it's like your duty to tell people what the reality is and what they need to do. But a lot of times, it's in a politically fraught environment. Nobody wants to make that statement. Nobody wants to say that stuff.
And you cannot report on assumptions, right?
Yeah.
Most of the data is assumptions. And so you can't say, hey, I'm going to report this to Wall Street or to the world or to whatever else. And, oh yeah, let me just make sure that points 2, 3, and 6 are just broad assumptions.
Right. They have asterisks at the bottom of the report, right? That said, this is aspirational functionality or based on what our vendors are telling us.
Yeah.
But at the same time, even though things can be so fraught, I don't want to end on a negative note. I want to say that it's very, there's a lot of possibility. There's a lot of potential. There's a lot of value. And, going about these things in a certain way will ensure that value, right? Because you can do validation points, right? As you were mentioning, you build on things, you make things modular, you have building blocks, you validate your assumptions, you get proof points, right? You show in use cases that you can actually accomplish something, right? That's why use cases are so critically important, and baseline measures, right? So if you can get the data and show the data, you can make tremendous inroads. So Tobias, so where can people find you? I know you have your website. It is rapid, rapyd.ai, correct?
Absolutely. I also have my personal website, tobiaszwingmann.com, where people can sign up to my newsletter. But Rapid AI is also a perfect address to check out. And obviously LinkedIn. Like, I'm posting on LinkedIn regularly, so if you want to connect with me or follow me there anytime. And
And tell me about your world. Like, I know you, what else do you like to do outside of generative AI and AI in general? What do you like to do with your
watching human AI unfold? I have 3 kids under 10, so it's really fascinating to spend a lot of time with them and just play and hang out and
watching those large language models get built, right?
Get built, and produce some real hallucinations.
But you gotta be careful because you're doing the fine tuning.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's a really good point.
With a bunch of random data, so let's see how that turns out.
Yeah, and guardrails, right?
Yeah,
guardrails.
I like my daughter is turning 10 soon, so I'm not sure if these guardrails will how long they will last. But let's see.
They get all torn down. Have you seen? What's the name of the Pixar movie? It's about the emotional.
Oh yeah, with the emotions. Yeah, I've seen the first one.
Inside Out. Is that what it's called?
Yeah. I just know the German title. Alles steht Kopf. I don't know the English title, but yeah.
Have you seen? Is there 2 of them now or 3 of them? 2 of them, right? The second one.
Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant, and absolutely representative of what goes on when we, build our world and our mental models and our representations, and then tearing down that model and rebuilding it, when certain things happen. It's a brilliant movie. But
absolutely, I like
very
it.
interesting. Go ahead.
One of my 16-year-olds actually was like, Dad, that's exactly how I feel for anxiety, because they got anxiety really good. And he was super serious, and he's 16, and he's like, Oh my gosh, that's exactly how I feel. Holy cow. And he's on this spectrum as well. So he couldn't articulate until he saw. Yeah.
Oh, it was so well done. I mean, I think it's one of the it's great when a movie can be entertaining and
Mhm.
insightful and not pedantic, but really, really meaningful. I think it's such a great movie for humans and for humans building their AI models, right? they're they're it's not artificial, right? It's real, it's reality, it's actual intelligence, right? It's
Absolutely.
so anyway, but well, that's great. And I guess you like to do a lot of outdoor stuff with the kids.
Yeah, we go swimming and outdoors, playing football, I have two
Hiking.
boys, so yeah, hiking.
Nice.
Yeah, we went to Switzerland for summer holidays and went there for some mountain touring and so, and it's just like a really beautiful spot to be there all the
Nice.
time.
Well, I love Switzerland. It's a beautiful place. Well, Tobias, this has been a lot of fun. I really want to thank you for your time. It's been great to have you, and we'll have all your contact information in the show notes. And again, thank you for your time. Thank you for participating.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you to our audience for tuning in. And Carolyn doing all her work in the background. Thank you, Chris. And again, this has been another episode of Early AI, and we will see you next time. Thanks.
Thanks, Tobias.
Thank you. Bye.
Visit early.com to find links to the full podcast on all audio platforms to listen on the go. Thank you for watching. Contact us today at info@early.com.